Okay, hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm a graduate student at the University of Toronto in the Department of Applied Psychology and Human Development. I'm here with Dr. Jamaal Matthews for our next Motivation Monday video. Dr. Matthews is a professor of psychology and education at Montclair State University. His research focuses on motivation in mathematics in urban schools and how race, the sociocultural context, and teachers can shape students' beliefs about mathematics. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Matthews.
No, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
The first question we have is, how can we as researchers help create more inclusive learning environments?
I believe we need to be, a bit more intentional about terms like, inclusive and equity, and prevent them from being purely rhetorical devices that we use, to make our research, appear more relevant. In higher ed and ed research, we throw around these terms so often, many times even carelessly, that we can, diffuse them of their meaning. So I think we really need to challenge one another to be clear and precise about what we mean when we hearken to these terms, inclusive, equity, social justice, and so on. For me, I feel like I really take a psychological perspective to inclusion. So for me, that means, the provision of access without having to sacrifice, diminish, or deny any part of oneself, in order to have that access. So for example, we could, increase the representation of marginalized students of color in AP classes, or perhaps women in STEM. And this can be an example of inclusion. But I believe that, increasing this representation without having, those individuals or those people sacrifice their cultural identity or become token or, constantly feel as though, they're under threat is a more productive version of inclusion in my eyes.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great answer. So really going beyond the semantics of the words, inclusion as a check off of our list and making sure that we're finding meaningful ways to integrate and understand each other and understand all the benefits of increasing equity and inclusion. Yeah, great. Thank you. So our next question is, one of the major challenges in studying underrepresented groups, particularly as it pertains to questions of intersectionality, is that of sample size. Do you have any suggestions for overcoming this kind of barrier?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Regarding the reference to intersectionality, I think we have to be really careful there. The question is endemic of some of the potentially problematic ways that, psychologists can elevate large-scale research as having greater merit than other forms of research. And, we know that psychology has always had a propensity towards larger sample sizes, generalizability, and so on. However, we know that these are not the only ways of producing reliable and valid information. And I think that sometimes our partiality towards these tendencies can be particularly hasty with emergent constructs like intersectionality, or when we're doing research with underrepresented groups that we may know very little about. Intersectionality is really still in its infancy, and I believe requires more theorizing and thus grounded research instead of large-scale research. And I think, the same can also be true for more general research with underrepresented populations. Most practically, I believe the best way to recruit healthy samples of underrepresented students is to build real partnerships with those communities and find avenues of mutual benefit, for the work. We can't just continue to do work on these populations, but really have to shift toward working with these populations.
That kind of leads nicely into my next question, which is that quantitative research up to this point has often included race as a control variable. So how can researchers move past controlling for race as a variable, and what types of methods do you think can help accomplish this?
This practice really reduces race to an explanation of variance in some outcome, which is really problematic because it actually doesn't help us learn anything about the cultural group, in question, or how they are actually experiencing the construct. And I think as researchers, that's what we really care about. But more productive, but perhaps less common methods to operationalizing race and culture are, as I mentioned, trying to capture a part of the actual experience of the cultural group in question. there's a need for us to be creative in how we operationalize a cultural experience of the group in question versus simply operationalizing the culture through some sort of categorical variable. So examples of this, might include microaggressions. So microaggressions is an actual cultural experience, that many disenfranchised, underrepresented populations have to go through, so on and so forth. And these are all examples of, operationalizing a part of a cultural experience for many disenfranchised and underrepresented populations, and doing so in light of, the social cultural context in which they live. And there are people doing this work, quantitatively. I think about, Christy Bird, who has validated, Dr. Christy Bird, who's validated a bunch of measures, on school racial climate and racially mixed schools. So measures on stereotyping, on colorblindness, on, cultural socialization. I think we just have to be really thoughtful and intentional about how we are thinking about race and culture beyond just distinct categories. I've been really fortunate, to have an opportunity to work on a special issue around these issues in the journal Contemporary Educational Psychology. And this special issue really focuses on these precise things, and race re-imaging traditional ed psych constructs through a cultural lens. And some of the papers for that, for that special issue are already out, but should all be finalized by early 2020. And many of the studies really do a great job of, trying to operationalize or understand a facet of the group's cultural experience and connect it to our traditional ed psych motivation research.
Thanks so much for pointing us in the direction of that special issue. We'll look forward to seeing that come out soon. And in addition, all the measures that you provided, that's a great perspective on how we can operationalize these constructs and how the measures to be able to measure them exist and are actively being developed. That's great information for our members for sure. So thank you so much for answering our questions today. We really appreciated hearing your perspective on these issues, and I think this will be really helpful for the members of our SIG to continue to move our field forward.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.